Hey guys, I'm Gene Delasala, president of Audioholics. Today I'd like to do something a little different for our YouTube channel. I want to talk about car audio systems. Now I know we're a home theater based website, but I did a search and I couldn't find a whole lot of information on people reviewing OEM systems in cars. And as a car enthusiast myself who loves cars almost as much as I love home theater, I've bought many cars over the years with supposedly premium audio systems that just didn't live up to what I expected them to do. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that and talk about ways of how you can make OEM systems better if you already have one. So let me give you a little bit of history. The last three cars that I've owned. The first of being a 2007 Acura TL Type S, and it had the 5.1 DVD audio system from Panasonic, but it was an Elliott Shiner system. It was a mixing producer. That was kind of a unique system because it's one of the only discrete 5.1 surround systems I've ever seen in a car. And it did a pretty good job of living up to the surround sound that it was trying to portray. I love the fact that it was playing all of my DVD audio discs and DTS CDs, which were quite popular in the early 2000s. So I was happy to play Porcupine Tree and Steely Dan and actually hear it in discrete 5.1. But the problems with that system were several actually. One being the center channel they put on the dash was a tiny little driver, didn't have the output efficiency, didn't have the bandwidth capability of the rest of the system. And it just, you could really hear how poor the center was anytime you'd hear vocals or anything coming out of it. The other thing is it only used a single 8-inch driver in the rear deck, didn't produce enough output, didn't produce enough bass, and it rattled like crazy. And that happens a lot when these manufacturers stick bass drivers in the rear deck. They tend to rattle. If you don't really isolate the cabin and isolate that driver onto the baffle, you get those problems. So there were some shortcomings in that system, and over the years, Acura did a pretty good job of making it better by adding more power and some more drivers, and then I think they upgraded to better speakers. It still wasn't the greatest system, but it was still a decent system for what it was. So the next system I got was in my Lexus IS350F, and that had a Levinson system. And that system was markedly better, especially for two-channel sources. They used the Harmon's Logic 7 processing, and it did a good job of giving you simulated surround. It had more power, especially for the subwoofer, and the Lexus cabin was way quieter, so you had more dynamic range. It just had better sound. But it had a shortcoming just like the Acura system. It put the bass drivers, actually the bass drivers were in the rear deck, that was fine, but it put the mid drivers on the doors all the way at the bottom of the floor, and then the tweeters were up at the windshield. So when you create that much distance, when the distance between the mid and the tweeter is greater than the wavelengths that are crossed over between them, you get a lot of acoustical interference, and it was a huge suck out. You could hear it. It sounded like you were listening to boom and sizzle. You really want those drivers as close together as you can. Now, real estate is very hard to get in a car, so sticking speakers is a hard proposition. So I can understand why most manufacturers did that. There are workarounds, however. Some companies use coaxial drivers where the tweeter and mid are together in one unit, and some companies, like you see in the BMW cars, they put the mid driver closer to the door handle so it's closer to the tweeter, which is right above it. That's a much better approach if you can do it, but there are some trade-offs. Usually the mid drivers are smaller, so you don't get as much efficiency or output. But, you know, it can work. Now, my third car that I'm going to talk about is the one I'm actually going to be modding. It's the BMW M235i. And in fact, it's getting hot in here, so I think I'm going to put the air conditioner on. We're in Florida here, okay? So the M235i comes with the Harmon system, Harmon Kardon. Now I bought it with this upgrade without actually listening to it because I know Harmon's reputation. So I kind of bought it, I should say, blindly. And I have to tell you, when I took delivery, I was sorely disappointed in the fidelity, and I just did not expect this out of Harmon. And I'm not trying to bash Harmon. I love the company, I love the research they do, but there's a lot of shortcomings in this system. It looks good on paper, the fact that they put the mids and the tweeters close together, the fact that they put the bass drivers under the seats, which is great because it reduces rattle and it gets you more tactile energy. But when you actually hear the execution of the system, it just doesn't live up to snuff. not as good as my last two cars, which is pretty bad for a $50,000 car. So let me tell you why there's shortcomings. Number one, Harmon was supposed to put the 16 speaker Logic 7 system in this car, like they did in the 3 Series. Now, I've come to find, I'm not sure if it's Harmon or if it's BMW's fault, but there was cost cutting done. So instead of getting 16 speakers, you're getting 12. And instead of getting Logic 7, you're getting 2 channel, and all they did was they took a left plus right mix and dump it into the center channel, offering no level control or even an ability to turn it off. Now, when you do that, you kill all hopes of having any kind of stereo separation or imaging, especially at the driver's seat. I know that they tried to put that center channel there as a center fill to give everybody decent sound, but the end result is it just gives you pretty bad sound for everybody. So the first step in making this system better is to get rid of that center channel, since there's no Logic 7 processing and there's no DSP going to it at all. And that's something that I'm going to be looking at doing. But the other problem with the system is, again, this is with most car audio systems, you're dealing with limited space. So they stuck a metal tweeter in here with a first order series crossover. And what happens with that is when you start cranking it up because you're in a loud car, and let's face it, BMW interiors are louder than the Lexus. You got more road noise because it's a sportier car. That tweeter's just getting bashed. It's just getting hit with all that power. And the fact of the matter is, at the lower frequencies near its resonant point, if you're not protecting it with the crossover, it just starts creating a lot of distortion. And you could hear it. The tweeters sound very harsh. It's not because it's a metal dome, it's just because the crossover execution is not ideal. And the other problem is the mid-range they used, they didn't put a high-pass filter on it. So this thing is just getting full range going to it. And I know why they did that. Number one, it's cost savings. You don't want to put a big inductor in there. Plus, number two, you lose power when you stick an inductor in there, and power is premium in a car. And number three, they try to get the best integration between the bass drivers under the seat and the mid-range. So they didn't want to have a big suck out in the 500 to 1000 hertz range. So I can understand that, but it does sound like there's something missing. The system sounds very tinny, and it just sounds kind of lifeless. It could play loud, but it just doesn't sound like it has any impact to it. And part of that is the amplifier that they used. Just like many other car companies, I think Bose started this. They don't have a power supply on the amplifier. They just use 12 volts. So how are you going to get a lot of power out of 12 volts? You got to try to use Ohm's law, and you got to use drivers that are very low impedance to get as much power as you can. And there's some trade-offs when you do that, and you could see that in this case. So I'm going to be looking over the next course a few months is upgrading the system. I'm looking at taking the Harmon amp out, putting a JL audio amp in with an SMPS power supply, and then I'm also looking at retuning the system. I'm going to delete the ASD in this car, basically, that pipes in exhaust sound, which I can't stand. It's gimmicky. I like to just hear the engine. I don't want to hear artificial noise. So I'm going to delete that, and you have to do that with a wire harness because it's not done in the digital domain in this car. I'm also going to look at adding a DSP to this car, probably from JL Audio again, so I can retune the system without the center channel. Because I'm telling you, getting rid of the center channel is going to make a huge impact. So at that point, we're going to see how the system sounds. And if we need to change drivers, we'll have the ability to change drivers now because we're going to have a real amplifier in here. So we could choose drivers that are higher impedance and still have good power going to them and get better performance. So anyways, guys, let me know if you think this is a good route for us to pursue. I think more than fewer people are going to be looking at getting the higher end audio systems in their car, and they want to know how they perform. We might be visiting dealers and listening to some car systems, so just let us know what car systems you want us to take a look at. And then maybe there's a case here to do upgrades, and maybe you guys could give input on the upgrades you've done to your OEM system. So give us some feedback below. Tell us what car you have, what system's in it, how you like it, what you've done to it to make it better. And let's keep this alive, guys, because we don't just stop having good sound in the home. You got to have good sound in your car too. Especially, I spend more time in my car lately than I do in my home theater. So anyway, guys, I hope you like this video. Thumb it up, share it, and until next time, keep listening and listen well, my friends.